Welcome to the Underline This podcast, the podcast where we unpack the big ideas hiding in the margins, because the best parts, they're between the lines. Today, we're going to expand our minds and explore the psychedelic novel, The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. I'd like to open with some rhetorical questions. What if your everyday consciousness wasn't reality, but a filter? What if your brain wasn't designed to show you the world as it truly is, but to protect you from seeing too much of it? Let's set the stage. The year is 1954, and Aldous Huxley published a short book essay that would become one of the most influential, controversial, and mind-warping works of the 20th century. It inspired scientists, philosophers, artists, musicians, and the psychedelic movement that was beginning to grow. And if you're familiar with the band The Doors, one of my personal favorites, this is the book that inspired their name. Today, we're exploring The Doors of Perception, a book that asks one of humanity's oldest questions: what happens when the doors of perception are thrown open? Now, The Doors of Perception is not a novel nor a scientific textbook. It's a philosophical memoir. It documents Aldous Huxley's experience taking mescaline, a naturally occurring psychedelic compound derived from the peyote cactus. And don't worry, under medical supervision, this is all done. And please note, I don't condone drugs. I don't take drugs. And lucky for us, Aldous Huxley has done it for us, so we can take his word for it. Now, rather than describing dramatic hallucinations and terrifying encounters with beings from another dimension, Huxley recounts ordinary objects becoming extraordinary. And a chair is no longer merely furniture. It becomes an intricate miracle of existence. It becomes a thing of beauty, its craftsmanship, and a thought-provoking journey of knowledge that took place to create it. Flowers appear infinitely more beautiful. A pair of trousers hanging on a chair seems to possess an almost sacred significance. Colors become impossibly vivid. Time nearly disappears. Direct experience takes center stage. Huxley argues that psychedelics don't create fantasy. They temporarily silence the brain's habitual filtering system. The human mind ignores nearly everything around us: the simple, the normal, and the things that really don't spark our attention. Evolution favors efficiency, not complete awareness. Now, we notice only what helps us survive. Arguably, I'd say at birth, everything we see is an overwhelming and fascinating experience. These trips that Aldous Huxley experienced were probably pretty similar to what a newborn baby experiences, because everything is new. And over time, since birth, that filter becomes much more effective. Everyday objects and nature are filtered out of our attention, which is a perfect segue to the next point. Huxley borrows philosopher Henry Bergson's idea that the brain functions not as a producer of consciousness, but as a reducing valve. And reality is overwhelmingly vast, so the brain narrows our perception into a manageable stream of information. Mescaline, Huxley suggests, partially opens this valve. Instead of experiencing only what is useful, we momentarily encounter reality in a richer, less filtered form. Now, the book repeatedly contrasts practical living with pure perception. Most of our lives revolve around labels such as, that is a chair in the corner, those are flowers on the porch, this is useful. Under mescaline, labels dissolve. Objects cease being categories and become unique expressions of existence. Huxley argues that artists, mystics, saints, and occasionally children glimpse this state naturally. Psychedelics may offer ordinary people temporary access to similar experiences. I told you. Now, without mescaline, I'd argue we can have micro experiences without the use of drugs. Meditation, observance, and spending time in nature really offer us this channel to experience and appreciate the miracles of existence and be fully present. There's my disclaimer. Importantly, Huxley is not advocating escapism. He recognizes that society cannot function if everyone remains permanently immersed in mystical awareness. We need our practical minds to work, raise families, solve problems, and survive. He proposes that occasional glimpses beyond ordinary consciousness can reshape how we understand ourselves and reality. The book ultimately becomes less about drugs than about perception itself. Its central question is profound. What if reality has always been more beautiful than we're capable of noticing? Now for Aldous Huxley. He was born in 1894 and died in 1963. He was one of the 20th century's most influential intellectuals, most known for Brave New World. Huxley spent much of his life exploring philosophy, religion, psychology, mysticism, consciousness, and human potential. His family was deeply rooted in science and academia. His grandfather was Thomas Henry Huxley, famously known as Darwin's bulldog for defending evolutionary theory. Now, despite growing up and being immersed in science, Aldo became increasingly fascinated by questions science alone couldn't answer. As a teenager, he suffered an eye disease that left him nearly blind for several years. Understandably, this experience shaped his lifelong interest in perception, both literal and metaphorically. By the early 1950s, psychedelics were still legal and largely unknown outside of scientific circles. Psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond invited Huxley to participate in controlled experiments using mescaline. Good friend. Huxley approached the experience not recreationally, but philosophically. He wanted to investigate consciousness itself, and thus, this experiment became the Doors of Perception. Now, the title comes from William Blake's famous line, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." Huxley believed Blake. Eastern mystics, Christian contemplatives, and psychedelic experiences might all point toward the same underlying truth. Human consciousness is far larger than ordinary awareness allows. Let's unpack some of these underlined ideas. First, the brain is a filter, not a camera. One of the book's most influential ideas is that the brain limits experience instead of creating it. Huxley argues that if we perceived everything simultaneously, we'd be overwhelmed. Instead, evolution developed a filter mechanism that shows only what's necessary for survival. So this, quote, reducing valve theory continues influencing neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness studies today. Second, utility often hides beauty. We become so focused on function that we stop seeing. A tree becomes lumber, a flower becomes landscaping, a person becomes their profession. Huxley reminds us that practical thinking often blinds us to wonder. Third, language simplifies reality. Words help us communicate, but they also compress incredibly rich experiences into tiny conceptual boxes. Calling something a chair prevents us from actually seeing the uniqueness of the object before us. The map replaces the territory. Fourth, mystical experiences share common ground. Huxley notices striking similarities between psychedelic experiences and descriptions from Buddhist monks, Christian saints, Hindu sages, and Sufi mystics. Different paths may produce remarkably similar reports of unity, timelessness, and profound interconnectedness. Fifth, consciousness exists on a spectrum. Ordinary waking awareness may not be the highest or only state of consciousness. Dreams, meditation, near-death experiences, artistic inspiration, prayer, and psychedelics may all reveal different dimensions of human awareness. Sixth, knowledge isn't the same as experience. Reading about beauty isn't beauty. Beauty about love isn't love. Reading about transcendence isn't transcendence. Some truths can only be encountered directly. Eighth, humility before reality. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the book is intellectual humility. Our everyday perception feels complete, but Huxley suggests that we may only be experiencing a tiny fraction of reality. Let's unpack some symbols now. First, with the doors. The central symbol represents access. Doors separate ordinary experience from expanded awareness. Opening them symbolizes moving beyond habitual perception into deeper forms of consciousness. Light. Throughout the book, light represents truth and direct awareness. Objects like the chair and the trousers seem illuminated not because they physically change, but because perception changes. Light becomes a metaphor for insight itself. Flowers. Flowers become symbols of intrinsic value. They exist beautifully without needing justification. For Huxley, they represent reality appreciated for its own sake rather than for utility. Art. Paintings throughout the book symbolize attempts to preserve moments of expanded perception. Artists occasionally capture what ordinary perception misses. Great art reminds us of how much beauty usually escapes our attention. The reducing valve. Perhaps the book's greatest metaphor, instead of consciousness being expanded by psychedelics, Huxley imagines consciousness already existing in abundance. The brain just merely regulates access. Let's talk about some popular adaptations. Now, unlike Brave New World, The Doors of Perception has never received a major film adaptation. Its influence has largely been indirect, and the book inspired countless documentaries about psychedelics, consciousness, and neuroscience. Its title famously inspired the rock band The Doors after vocalist Jim Morrison encountered Huxley's work while studying literature. Its influence can also be seen in films exploring altered consciousness, philosophical documentaries, and modern discussions surrounding psychedelic-assisted therapy. Because the book is primarily reflective and philosophical rather than narrative, it has proven difficult to adapt directly into traditional film. Ironically, its greatest adaptation may have been cultural rather than cinematic. Let's talk about the Underline This legacy. Few books under 100 pages have changed culture as profoundly as The Doors of Perception. It helped launch serious public conversations about psychedelics decades before modern neuroscience revisited the field. Today, researchers at institutions like Johns Hopkins University, Imperial College, London, and other leading research centers are once again studying psychedelics for depression, PTSD, addiction, and end-of-life anxiety. Whether Huxley's conclusions were entirely correct remains debated. Many neuroscientists question aspects of the, quote, reducing valve theory, while others see intriguing parallels with contemporary research into productive processing and the brain's filtering mechanisms. Regardless of where one stands, the book's enduring importance lies in the question it raises rather than the answers it provides. It invites us to ask, how much of reality do we actually perceive? How much of our experience is shaped by habit? Can moments of awe permanently change the way we live? What role should altered states of consciousness play in understanding the mind? Perhaps Huxley's greatest contribution wasn't promoting psychedelics. It was encouraging curiosity. He reminds us that certainty is often the greatest obstacle to discovery. The world may be stronger, richer, and more beautiful than our ordinary consciousness allows us to notice. And maybe wisdom begins the moment we realize how much we've been overlooking. Finn, thank you for listening to the Underline This podcast. If today's episode opened a new door in your thinking, we'd love to hear your perspective. Follow us on social media, wherever you get your podcasts, and share this episode with someone who's curious about philosophy, psychology, or the mysteries of consciousness. Be sure to visit Underline This blog for show notes, reading recommendations, and more deep dives into the books that continue shaping how we see the world. Until next time, keep reading carefully, stay curious, because the best parts, they're between the lines.